What are the manners of uzla, spiritual seclusion? What are the manners of spiritual seclusion? So the Imam, he says here, he says that it is a must, if you will, that the person that's going to seclude themselves for spiritual purposes must intend the following. Okay? We know that innamal a'malu binniyat. Actions are by their intentions. The actions that we are going to embark upon and do, they are going to be based upon our intentions, and thus the reward will follow suit. So the first thing is, there's a couple of things that you're going to intend with this, and they have to be in a particular order. So the first thing is that by secluding yourself, you are essentially protecting people from your own evil. Okay, you're protecting people from your own misdeeds and your own misgivings. That's number one. Number two is, then you are seeking refuge, if you will, from the evil of the wicked. Okay, you see the order? The order is very important, because this particular order is the way to humility. By intending first that you want to protect people from your own misgivings, that's being humble. As opposed to saying, look, I just got to get away from these evil sinners. I'm better than them. Hopefully you can see the difference. As opposed to saying, look, I am a sinner. I have downfalls, I have flaws, I have mistakes, I have etc., etc. And part of me secluding myself is to protect them from that harm. And then, of course, I'll seek refuge and seek some type of peace, if you will, from the evil of the wicked. And you notice here that the Imam, he says, the evil of the wicked instead of the evil of them, meaning everybody else, those that are, in your community. Because not every person in your community life is evil. That's another thing to remember, that fellowship and community life, it's not a bad thing. It can be a great thing. It can be a wildly enriching thing. However, if the community that you surround yourself with, they are evil, then the result of that fellowship is going to be evil. And so that is certainly something that you have to keep in mind. That's number two. Number three is that you're going to basically save yourself from the downfalls of not being able to fulfill the many rights of the Muslims. The more friends you have and the more people that are in your circle, if you will, the more rights there are to be fulfilled. We know the importance of fulfilling rights in Islam, and every Muslim has rights over their fellow Muslim. And the closer they are in connection to you or in proximity to you, the more rights that they have over you. So the more people that you have in your world, if you will, the more rights there are. And when you're unable to fulfill those rights, then of course, that's just problematic. And so it's pragmatic and practical to try and reduce the number of people so that, in precaution, you're not constantly compromised by just being unable to fulfill those rights. And of course, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah doesn't burden a soul with more than it can bear. And then lastly, so this would be number 4 in what your intention is going to be for spiritual seclusion. Number 4 is so that you can focus your attention to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can fixate, if you will, your heart on Allah's servitude. As opposed to being distracted by many different things, you can focus on that. And these 4 things make up the foundation of your intention for spiritual seclusion. That's the first part of this, the manner. The first step is the intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. That is the foundational step. And so you have to get off on the right foot. Just like you do with any other act, it has to be solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it has to be for specific intents. And those were the intents that we should bear in mind when doing so. The next part here is what you should be doing with your time. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past. However, to give a little more clarity, the Imam, he says that your free time should be spent with perpetual knowledge or perpetually seeking knowledge and righteous actions. And I want to stop here for a brief moment, right? That you should be consistent in knowledge, seeking knowledge, learning, reviewing. This is key. Reviewing. You know, this is one of the means by which you can master knowledge, and that is through revision, through repetition, right? There's obviously through experience by applying the knowledge that you learn. Then there's by teaching others the knowledge that you've learned. That's another way in which you can master. And then there's mere repetitious, simple repetition. So I'll give you an example. And a lot of people, they kind of overlook this. And that is Ramadan is around the corner. We're like 20-some days away from Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. And right now what we should all be doing is preparing by reviewing the rulings of Ramadan. Preparing ourselves by reviewing the rulings, the legislative rulings, the Islamic rulings of fasting, etc., what breaks the fast, what's recommended to do during the fast, what we should be doing before the fast. You know, right now, if you have days that you missed from last year, it's right now that you should be making up those days. What happens if I don't make up those days? What do I have to do, etc.? All those things should be reviewed. And the more that you review, the more that you will master those rulings and those concepts as you continue throughout your training. You should never be thinking, well, I already did that. I already read about that. I already learned about that. I attended a class 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Well, when I was in Sunday school as a kid, we learned about Siyam. We learned about fasting and what that means. No, that's not the way of the masters. It's not how our scholars mastered the tradition by going, well, when I was a little kid, I learned that. I heard that already. No, they just kept repeating over and over and over again. And my personal experience is that all of the teachers that I've ever sat with and had the honor to be in the presence of, when it came to teaching, they had no problem repeating books in their entirety over and over again. Some of them would have a habit of, once they started the text, they would go until it was complete, and then they would restart the very next day, essentially, and keep teaching that, perpetually teaching that same thing. In fact, the scholars of Islam, they say, the fuqaha, their recommendation is that you should you should have a manual, for example, of whatever subject that should be read once a year, that you should go through once a year. So, for example, Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. If we were to say, like, this is the metin when it comes to etiquette and manners and spiritual endeavor, etc., if this was going to be the manual, then technically we should be reading this together once a year. We should complete it, and then at the beginning of the year, we come back and we start again. And so while you're in spiritual seclusion, this is one of the things that you could be doing right now. You can be preparing for Ramadan by reviewing the information associated with the month. Regardless if you've studied it before a dozen times, go over it again. Look for more detail this time. Think about it in different ways, etc. Teach it this time to someone. Learn it and then teach it. So not only are you going to be reviewing and learning about the Islamic rulings and the knowledge of the Sharia, which will help you apply our practice as Muslims, but also Tawheed. That's another very important thing that should be reviewed on the regular basis while you are in this spiritual seclusion, is learning more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, studying Allah's names and attributes and the various different issues of doctrine. That's something else that should be repeated. You take one particular text and you just repeat it over and over again, adding more detail, going in more depth, etc., until you have mastered those particular topics. That is one of the first things that you should be doing while secluded during these times. Also, so that you can gain the real benefits of uzla, is you should try and prevent people or stop people from visiting you on a regular and an abundant basis. If you're going to have time to visit, and we'll talk about that shortly, as being a part of the experience, uzla doesn't mean like you have to be a hermit and you don't see anybody and you're a forgotten human being somewhere out in the badia, out in the countryside. No, you can interact with people, but on a limited basis. Otherwise, if it's unlimited, unrestricted visitation, then you're going to be you're going to be distracted. You will be distracted by the people that come and visit you on a regular basis. Also, limit your conversations about what's going on so that you keep the visit short and sweet, and try and avoid listening to the rumors of what's going on in town and in community, etc. Stay away from those rumors and what most people busy themselves with. The Imam, he says all of that will be planted in the heart, like a seed is planted into the soil, to the point that it will begin to grow in your prayer. It will begin to sprout, if you will, during your prayer. While you're in prayer, it's so ironic, while you have secluded yourself from the world so that you can focus on Allah's worship and servitude, while you're standing in prayer, in worship, the world has come to you and it has sprouted in your heart. You don't have to be there physically, but because you've allowed all of that to soak into your mind and be absorbed by your heart, while you're trying to purify that and be fixated and focused on worship, it's growing and it has sprouted, and therefore it is distracting and taking over. And he basically says, like, look, this information, this news, these tales, these rumors, all this stuff, to the hearing is like the seed planted in the earth. He also says that you have to be satisfied with little when it comes to the world. You should find satisfaction in the little things that you have and not have this hunger and this insatiable appetite for worldly desires, delights, pleasures, creature comforts, etc. Because if you can't find satisfaction in little, you won't be able to live in an environment where most of your time is dedicated to the pursuit of spiritual endeavor. You're going to have to go out and you're going to have to, as we know, get on the wheel. You're going to have to be on that wheel, man, and churn out that butter, so that you can fill your life with all of the worldly possessions that you feel are needed to be satisfied. And this, of course, is going to require you to get out there and mix and mingle with people. And, of course, if you're after seclusion, then that's certainly not what you want. The next thing, of course, is you have to be patient when it comes to whatever harms and hardships that you face from other people. Don't listen to them when it comes to praise. Don't listen to people praise you because you are performing uzla, like you're some special person. You don't want to listen to that or give any credence to those types of praises. And then again, you also, do not want to listen to people's disparagement of you for leaving community life and abandoning fellowship for spiritual seclusion. There'll be people that'll go either way. They'll praise you or they'll disparage you. And that goes back to the principle that you can never make people happy. You can never make all the people happy all of the time. Right? And if you give credence to these things, that side or that side, it's going to impact your heart, and it will likely be a roadblock in your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the home of the hereafter. The next thing is have someone that you can sit with or spend some time with, a righteous person that you can spend a little bit of your time with, and some of the imams that actually even mention having a righteous and pious spouse. So again, here this goes to show that it's not necessary that for you to be in spiritual seclusion, you have to be single or you have to be without company. No, that's a part of it. That's needed. It's needed because, just like in worship, we need diversity. Just like when we worship, we need to be able to change things up a little bit, mix it up so that it doesn't become weary. We don't become weary. It doesn't become wearisome on us. And so while we're alone, most of the time focused on the above-mentioned things, you need to break it up sometimes. And that means you need to spend some time talking and being in the presence of someone else. So you have to be very picky and choosy about this. Either it's going to be a righteous person that'll visit you when needed in order to break up the routine and ward off boredom and weariness, or a righteous spouse who appreciates what it is that you're doing and respects the journey that you're on and is willing to support, and perhaps they're on their own journey so that things are, coherent and cohesive, right? That's important. If you've got somebody, if you have a spouse who just just requires an extra amount of your time and dedication and attention, then this isn't going to work out. This won't work out, right? So if that's what you're after, you have to be on the same page, you and the spouse, either the husband or the wife. Of course, this will help, giving, like I said, to break up the monotony of being alone, and that will assist you, when you part ways and you go back to what it is that you were doing. Also, the only way that you're going to be patient while you are secluded is by severing the desires of this world. You have to sever the hunger and the thirst that you have for the world. And the only way that you can do that is by recognizing that your lifespan is very short. You have to recognize that life is short. And I think that this predicament that we're in, the situation, that this has been one of the greatest lessons that we are learning, is that life is short and life is fragile and life is not promised. It's not promised, that an age is not promised to us. We've learned that. We're seeing that. We're not promised I'm going to get 80 years out of this life. Life is very short and things could come up that you would not expect and it can be all over. So in order to help sever those desires for the world, you have to remember the fact that life is short. And that will help you kind of, gain the proper perspective that's needed. Also, to remember that when you wake up, you're not promised the night. And when you go to sleep at night, you're not promised the morning. And this will help you be patient in the moment. And that's key, is that you're kind of living in the moment and recognizing that what is most valuable is what you have right now. The time that you have right now is what is most valuable. The next thing here is that you constantly remember death. This is also one of the secrets or the tips and the tricks of being spiritually secluded. You remember death often, and you also remember the loneliness of the grave when you start to feel lonely. When loneliness starts to overwhelm you, you remember the grave. You think about the grave and how lonely you'll be then. You will be by yourself. Your family, your wealth, it will all stay behind, and it will be you that is there in that grave. And so it's important that you remember that at times of loneliness. When you feel like, I just can't take this loneliness anymore, you think, wait a minute, what about the loneliness of the grave? I won't be able to come back and do what I set out to do. Also, to fill your heart with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to know that those that do not fill their heart with the remembrance of Allah or His awareness, that which is required to have an intimate relationship, if you will, an intimate discourse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they won't be able to handle the loneliness after their death. And knowing that, whoever has this level of intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this awareness, death will not strip it away, but it will carry on. That connection and that relationship will carry on after that person's death, because death does not destroy the love and the awareness that one has of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what is found mentioned in the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the shuhada, the martyrs. He says, بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, with their provision provided. This is in Surah Al-Imran. And so everyone that frees themselves up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they free themselves up for the sake of Allah in jihad and nafs, and this is, striving against the lower self, then this person is a shaheed. This person is a shaheed. Those that die in this state, they're considered shuhada. And this is what has been mentioned by a number of the companions when some have says, رَجَعْنَا مِنْ جِهَادِ الْأَصْغَرِ إِلَى الْجِهَادِ الْأَكْبَرِ. We've come back, when they would come back from battles and from war, they said, we've come back from the minor jihad, which is physical, of defending the land, defending the people, serving the country, serving, so we thank you for your service. They've come back from that service and they've gone into the much more important service, and that is struggling against their own slowly selves and their desires, as was reported by a number of the collectors of hadith like Imam Ahmad and Imam At-Tirmidhi, etc. So that's that's it. That wraps up the chapter. And hopefully you can use some of those tips and tricks and fundamentals for the days and perhaps the weeks to come. Now that you've understood some of the benefits of uzla, spiritual seclusion, you also have kind of a list of things that you can do. It's also important to remember that the greatest uzla or seclusion is to seclude yourself from lowly qualities and bad behavior. That is the ultimate type of uzla, is to withdraw and pull away from those base and lowly characteristics that many of us are challenged and tried with. So with that, once again, I thank you for your attendance. Jazakallah khair for coming and being with me here for a few moments online. Hopefully we can connect again.